Hi, I'm very excited to have with me today MAX.TAN, who is wearing many hats for SIFA 2022. He is the creator of which is Act 1 of Ceremonial Enactments, and he's also the costume designer for the other acts of Ceremonial Enactments, as well as two other productions, MEPAAN as well as Bangsawan, Gemala, Malam. I have a lot of questions for you about, how you approach the design process for the costumes. I wanted to first ask, as a fashion designer, how did you come to start designing costumes for the stage?
Well, I think, there's so many different experiences that led to me eventually designing costumes for the stage. Before I started being a fashion designer, my first full-time job right out of the army was with MediaCorp, the TV station, and I was a costume designer. And I think that really helped shape me to become more sensitive to dressing cast, dealing with different body types, different characters, and then I started my full-time designing for my fashion label, and I got a chance to work with Toy Factory, where I designed the costumes for Upstage. It's the production called Upstage, and it's part of the Hawaii Festival in 2015. And then that was where I kind of see where I can bring my fashion design training into costume designs, and generally what I do with the brand is the language is very specific. It's black, it's monochromatic, but I'm actually really colorful. I love colors, I love textures, I love exploring different silhouettes, and costume design really does give me that room to explore this side of me that I can't do with the fashion brand.
That's so interesting because, yeah, I do feel like as an audience, seeing your costumes on stage, they do feel like fashion pieces. I feel like you could collect everything and say, okay, let's do a fashion show for that production, or even as a standalone thing. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how you see fashion design in comparison to costume design, or what is the significance of each to your own practice?
I think for fashion design, it's really it's a very egoistic. I design from how I see the brand. The manifesto is there, the brand story is there, and this is how I imagine what women can wear. This is my different proposal to what is already available out there, in which the fashion design part, I really explore a lot of how Southeast Asian elements and garment archetypes can influence modern fashion design, rather than me literally translating, say, a historical or heritage piece of garment. So that's fashion design for me, and I always start from a very technical point of view. I don't sketch as much. I go through a lot of collaging, and I go through a lot of draping and drafting before I even start sketching. And then for costume design, this is where I also bring in some of my own practices and processes, collaging, draping, a lot of exploration work to costume design. But like what I mentioned earlier on, I have so much more room that is free up for me to play with colors, textures, working with different body types, how different casts play different characters. And I think my belief as a costume designer is to help, to use garments, to use costumes, to help the cast become a believable character on stage. So visually, I hope the garments and the costumes speaks to them, and they can deliver that character they are trying to portray.
So it sounds to me like with fashion design, you're thinking about the work that you put out there as a kind of provocation, right? What you said, a different proposal.
Yes.
And with costume design, it's really a little bit more of a supporting role, that you see the costumes as a piece that's able to, in a way, support the cast in birthing their character, right? How do they step into the particular personality or the quirks of that particular character?
Absolutely right. Yeah, and I think this sensitivity to using the different elements to help the cast become this believable character. There's a lot of cross and interdisciplinary between these two very different disciplines, costume and fashion design. When I say different, they're not vastly different because the form is garments, but they play different roles and therefore they serve a very different function.
So maybe on this note, I want to ask, I don't know if it's too cliched, but what is good, or what do you look out for in terms of fashion, and what are then the more specific elements that you look out for in terms of costume design? Like what makes a good costume design to you?
I think I'll start with fashion. My interest in fashion is really the construction of things. Deconstruction, reconstruction is an integral. It's a very important element in my development and exploration works. My proposal, I'm aiming to put out a different proposal to to how dresses should be made, how garments should be made. So it stems from a very technical perspective. Say, if I were to use a very loose example, now how would I make this T-shirt look different but still look like a T-shirt? And then over the recent years, I think my question would be, how do I make this T-shirt in a Southeast Asian kind of way and with that sensibility? So there's this discourse that I'm trying to open up with my fashion design works, and to me, I don't know if that's good or bad fashion design, but it's something that I'm very interested in. And with costume design, I think helping the cast become that character is important to me, and I think that is my essential goal when I start costume design for a character. Of course, visually it has to serve the script, and then it has to serve functions and for example, quick change devices and all that. But the look cannot be affected. So I think there are many ways to approach costume design. For me, I always start off with how this character should look, how this costume, this garment should look, before I address the technical issues such as quick changes, how the Velcro can be heard, and all this. If I were to take a different approach, like, okay, let's start off with addressing the issues at hand first, I think that's very limiting. I mean, both are not, there are different approaches, not right or wrong, but to me, I very much prefer imagining this visual outcome before I address any technical issues. Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel the visual is really something that comes across very clearly. When I was looking at your mood boards and the costume design proposals for the different productions, I was really struck by precisely what you're talking about for your fashion design, the kind of collaging, the deconstruction and reconstruction. I noticed that the first image that we see in your mood board is a kind of visual collage, right? Is that something that has always been important for you in designing it? I would call it designing, right? The kind of mood board. Has that been the case for you since the very beginning? Or have you found a kind of visual language as well over the years of working in fashion and in costume?
I think as a fashion designer, and costume designer, I'm very much interested in the processes that lead up to the eventual outcome, the costume outcome, or the garment or the fashion outcome. And just to use my fashion design processes, I think I'm in my 12th year of practice now. In my first 5 years, my process would be taking out garments, draping, and really just tearing things apart. And that's my process before sketching. I don't jump right into sketching because I think if I were to do that, you see, when we start sketching, we draw from memory. And we can't really claim these memories because I might have seen this dress somewhere else, made by some other person, and that's not right. I think the outcomes must be informed by the creative's individual processes, and in these processes that the creative employ, it will open up new elements and open up new things to look at, and just open up that creative conversation, and hopefully it leads to the outcomes and beautiful outcomes. So in the first 5 years, this draping and deconstruction process is something I'm very interested in, and after that I begin to think about using graphic design as something that I want to bring into my process. So that's why I start to do collages, and before even deconstructing garments, I'm trying to piece different elements of historical pictures together, and really just having fun with it. And then this sets the tone. Normally this sets the tone for the collection, and then I bring in the device I was using, which is deconstruction, into the process back again. So I think over this last 12 years, it's a scaffold of processes, and I'm ready to jump into my next phase, which I don't know what is that yet, but I think that defines my processes. And to answer your question, yes, I think processes has been important to me. Collaging has been important to me. Deconstruction is important to me, but all these are just part of processes that I think a creative must not do about. If not, we're just creating based on memory, which is a very dangerous path to track down.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I really loved hearing that you went through different phases, and it sounds like you're also feeling like there's another shift that's happening in your process right now. And yet, throughout all these different phases, it sounds like process is something that you hold very important and very dear to you. And on this note about process, I was then wondering, for SIFA, you are working on not just one, but 3 different productions, right? What was the kind of working process and communications that you had to manage and negotiate along the way? Because you're not just dealing with the individual directors. I'm sure you're also speaking to Natalie as the festival director, right? Could you give more insight into how that went?
Yeah, I think for the productions I'm creating costume designs for SIFA 2022 this year, it's MEPAAN, which is Singapore Chinese Orchestra, and the Too Young Initiative. And then for Ceremonial Enactments, where we have 293 Northwest and Yantra Mantra. I'm also creating Gemala Malam, and Bangsawan Gemala Malam for Teater Ekamatra. And there's a very strong connecting thread of culture and heritage within all these, spread out across these productions. And I think that's where I need to be extra sensitive, because I don't think as a designer it's my place to say, now I want to deconstruct and propose a new qipao. Because to me, cultural and heritage garments do not need to be reinvented. They're artifacts. You won't reinvent a Mona Lisa, right? But I think we can use culture and heritage to inform costume designing. I always tell my team, through our research, through our collaging, what are we designing for? Who are we designing for? What is the outcome? Are we designing and dressing the obvious? And if not, then are we dressing nuances? What are the design elements that we pick out from all these heritage garments, how that can inform costume design. Are we looking at line silhouettes? Are we looking at just how a sari is being draped around the body, that cocooning action? How that cocooning action can then be applied to a dance costume. So these are the things that I'm looking at. And of course, visually, they are all three very different productions. And in Ceremonial Enactments itself, it's another three very different productions, three different acts and very different visual languages. But there is an overarching artist stamp, costume designer stamp on things. If you look at it, it's very dynamic, it's very rich, it's textural, it's graphic, it's very graphical. It's not flat. And then to balance how, because 293 Northwest is by Nadi Singapura, is a Malay percussion group, and I of course have to draw inspirations from the cultural, the heritage garments of the Malay community, and then with Bangsawan Gemala Malam, it's Teater Ekamatra, and that it's we are talking about Nusantara and of course the Malay inspiration and the heritage garments. But how do I approach and then approach design, the costume design for both of them differently? I think this goes down to then me bring in my fashion design training. Okay, for this particular piece, for example, 293 Northwest, we are talking about color blocking. We are talking a little bit on how to, the festivity of a Malay wedding and that joyfulness really shines through the costume. And then with Bangsawan Gemala Malam, we are talking about decolonization and how do we make this Western ball gown look a little Asian. Yeah, because I think we have all had that. We have all seen how cultural garments is being used, and in this way, in this case of Gemala Malam, there's this added layer of Shakespeare and you know, it's this collage, very collage way of working with culture, and then with 293 Northwest, it's more interpretive. Yeah.
Yeah, and this, you know, I'm hearing that within these three productions, there have been a lot of emphasis also on the, in a way, the Southeast Asian aspect, right? And that seems to link very nicely into your own interest as a fashion designer. I'm curious, what has been your research process with these three productions? You know, when we talk about looking up materials or the kind of, you know, digging into archives, I suppose, before you start creating, what were some of the sources that you were looking at, or the kinds of references that you were drawing on?
I think this whole research process is really another level to what I'm already doing for the label. So for example, Gemala Malam, I'm looking at visual references from various tribes in Southeast Asia. There's the Minangkabau, there's the Batak, and you know how, and trying to find this common language that all the tribes share, but also highlight the differences. So the research eventually led me to elements that I pick out from. Say if the overarching thread for Gemala Malam is drapery and decolonization, then it cannot be just a uniform thing. So what other elements do I give each different character? Of course, going to a library, research, and looking at how things are made, and exploration works. And I actually looked at how I bought a sarong and I mean, this was for my fashion side, which inspired a collection because that whole collection was inspired by how a sarong is being wrapped around the body and being worn. So I was just having fun trying to play around with how the sarong is being worn. And if you look at how the sari is being worn as well, it's a seamless way of wearing things. Southeast Asia is something very close to my heart at the moment, and I really do appreciate how I can bring these research into the costume design.
What I'm hearing is that, you know, depending on the different production, you went into the specificities, right, of maybe either the cultural groups that that you're drawing from, or you're looking at more specific garments and trying to understand, I'm guessing, the kind of materiality
Yes.
or the technical aspects of how they were constructed as a way of then, you know, deconstructing all of these and then reinterpreting it for the different productions, something like that.
Yeah, and just to add on, like, if I were to go to I think we've been to the museums as kids, right? And when you see the Asian garments being put up, it's usually a piece of cloth. It's just a square piece of cloth. And for me, my question as a kid was, so how is this garment being worn? And this really drives me as a creator now. Okay, I have no idea how it's being worn. There are visual references for me to be inspired from. Now let's take it a step further. Let's try to wear this garment and see how the wearing of a traditional garment can inform costume or modern fashion design.
Yeah, that's so interesting that you talk about looking at a sarong and being inspired by the different ways in which it can come alive. When I look at your costumes, I'm always struck by how much presence they have actually, that, you know, they feel as much of a body on stage as the performers themselves. Is that something, how do you think about the body of costumes?
I think the garments need to have a certain presence on stage. Of course, we are talking about costume designs where the costumes are a little bit more stylistic and not naturalistic. So when we're talking about these stylistic costumes, my interest is really silhouettes. And then it comes to colors and the clash of colors. I like to use colors in a very dynamic way, a contrasty and dynamic way. I love muted tones too, but a personal preference is to just draw the eye to the performer. And I guess this is where how I see the body of the costume. And if I were to go further into the cast body shape and working with different body shapes, this is where I bring in the fashion design part, really thinking about proportions, line work, style lines, layers, textures, fabrics, and bring all these very basic design elements and applying them onto costume design. These are just a parameter that I work with, and that should guide the costume design. But in terms of visually highlighting the body of this costume, I think that's where I really leave it to the cast to bring that out as well, because the body of the costume, when we're talking about that, yes, that's the costume, but we're also talking about the wearer. So in which I think when I'm doing costume design, there's a dialogue between the performer and the body wearing it that can help to bring this costume to life. And it's a two-way conversation. And then this costume helps the cast to become this, step into this character. So yeah, I don't know how to really answer question specifically, but I do see the body of the costume as a conversation between the human body, the wearer, the cast, and the garment.
Yeah, I think what's coming up for me is perhaps because there's so much sensitivity and rigor in designing the costume of the character, right? That perhaps that is what is transmitted to me as an audience, that I see in a way the body of the character, and then that is further magnified when the performer steps into and inhabits that costume, right?
Yeah.
That then coupled together, it really becomes this incredible visual presence on stage that is able to draw the eye of the audience to them. And the second point that I'm picking up from what you said is, how do we dress for the individual performer? And I think that is so crucial to the job of a costume designer, right? That in a way, when you're designing for fashion, you don't know who is going to be wearing your clothes. You don't know how they want to be wearing their clothes, or what kind of look or feel or vibe that they're going for. And yet, with costumes, there is a very specific performer who is going to inhabit that particular costume. And, you know, I've heard sometimes costume designers talking about the sensitivity that's also needed to address maybe different performers' self-consciousness about different parts of their bodies. I think about costume design as being also deeply intimate compared to maybe lights or of course there's a materiality to the stage, but costumes are so close to our body, right? How have you navigated that in the context of these three productions? And I'm thinking maybe specifically the SCO piece, because there are so many of the orchestral members. How are you negotiating, you know, the sensitivity that you want to bring to the costumes with the fact of that number of bodies on stage?
Well, yes, in the first part of the question, you mentioned how everyone has some insecurities about their bodies, and I think this is where I come in to help and apply those design knowledge and elements like proportions, line works, and creating this look for them. But I think more importantly, say if I were to use a past productions as examples, for Opposition by Drama Box and The Necessary Stage, where City Khee plays her character. Before I even start designing, of course, I would have had my conversations with Heng Wan, Elvin, and Haresh, and more specifically, I think the directors also had their conversations with the cast. How does the cast see this character? What would he or she be wearing? And sometimes I have these conversations with the cast, and that helps inform my process as well, because ultimately you are the one wearing and performing that role, and it's extremely important I have these conversations. And when these conversations are being discussed, some concerns are being addressed as well. So in terms of body, things that we want to cover up or show, and we address these concerns at the same time. And specifically about SEO, it just so happened that I just redesigned their uniforms for this year. So there's already a very nice base for me to work with. So for MEPAAN, because it's a huge orchestra, and the stage design is amazing. And a part of Natalie's vision for MEPAAN is to see this lushness of the orchestra, musicians' bodies, the costumes they are wearing, and that should kind of also inform the set design and how the orchestra is part of the set design. They are the performers, but they are also part of the set. So this is where the colors, I'm picking up, oh, okay, then I think I need to use colors. How do I use it such that they are not too distracting? How do I be more sensitive to how the different instruments are being played, and how the costume shouldn't obstruct their playing? But I think I'm very lucky to have been given a head start when I was working on the redesigning of their uniforms. So I'm mixing and matching pieces from their uniforms. Yeah.
That sounds very serendipitous and in a way feels completely in line with this idea of the constructing, reconstructing, deconstructing kind of element of your own practice. And I love thinking about kind of the costume design as being part of the visual and set design as well. And you know, what were your conversations like with the different designers for all three productions?
I think for Bangsawan, Gemala, Malam, we started off with just sharing visuals, sharing research, Aline sharing what she feels about the production, what's the vibe, what's the overarching theme, what is she seeing, and then for the creative artistic director, Farid, what is he seeing, and that's where we have conversations about Nusantara, and then I brought in decolonization, because I don't want to be replicating Nusantara costumes, because then it might look, then where's this discourse that I want to open up, like why can't a costume design or Western outlook costume design be influenced by Southeast Asia and heritage and history? Why is it always the other way around? Like, okay, this kabaya is being inspired by the West. Why can't it be the other way around? And that's where we talk about the topic of a bit of decolonization and how this can influence costume design, and how it can also be a running thread for the different design elements in the show. And a few things we nailed down, it has to be visually really, really rich. There are different running strands in the play itself. How do we separate and highlight each strand such that they are a standalone piece, standalone act in itself already? But in a way, it all has to be so harmonious. And I think this harmony can only be achieved if there's research and there's these conversations that happen between me and the directors and the creative, artistic directors. And with this in mind, okay, decolonization, Nusantara, this becomes this running thread throughout these three acts, and then each of them have different colors and elements and different magic to them. Yeah. So in a way, it's very although it's very collage, but you can see there's some harmony and consistency to the visual language.
Yeah, I'm hearing that you're working very closely with, in a way, Farid and Aline for Bangsawan, Gemala, Malam. Did you also speak to the other designers, or how did you all harmonize, right, amongst the different designers? Just now you mentioned for MEPAAN, again, the conception of the set and the costumes being part of the set. Was that also something that you spoke about with, the set designer for MEPAAN?
For MEPAAN, yes. So for MEPAAN, yes, I spoke to, when my costume designs are out, of course also considering how, without giving away too much, yes. There's a reconfiguration of how the musicians are being seated on stage. It's not your usual orchestra, Chinese orchestra seating arrangement, musicians arrangement, and because it's different. The colors that are being used will affect set design and his overall. In this case, it's Wong Chi Wai. Chi Wai is the set design, the marvelous set designer. Yes. Yeah, so and from MEPAAN, yeah, and we needed to have that conversation. Where do you see this hue on stage? If I were to give you this hue on stage, then where do you see this as like collage or a mismatch of colors, or do you see a gradation of colors moving through the stage? What do you see? And that helps me to then decide, okay, this group of musicians are wearing this color scheme. And yeah.
It's open enough. And I think that's the case with costume and design in general, right? That they're often quite open, that even if you describe it, everyone has a very different imagination of what is possible, which is why, you know, things like mood boards are really great for myself and other people as directors to be able to like, okay, I see this is what you have in mind, that we're all on the same page and again, in harmony, right? I think, you know, what strikes me from hearing you talk about your work as a costume designer is, in a way, I think about a sense of provocation. That, you know, you're saying that your work as a costume designer is about, you know, aligning and supporting the work of the production and the cast, and yet the way you talk about your being very careful about your positionality in all these different productions, and especially in managing these threads around, you know, referencing things from the Nusantara traditions. And I feel like there is a very strong sense of the costume designer as offering a provocation for how else we can think of costumes outside of the realm of the production. That somehow there is something about the way costumes are also relating to the larger world, the larger discourses around us in relation to decolonialism, or, you know, just so many other ways in which we might think about consumerism as well. You know, how do you feel about me saying that?
I don't know, I've never really thought about that. But yes, I think to a certain extent, yes, provocation. As a fashion designer, I think I'm really, I would use the word rebellious. You know? I don't like to do things the correct way. And there are rules that I think I can bend and work around with. And with costume design and yes, with fashion design, they both, like what you said, yes, it's provocation. I see this as provocation. I also see this as a conversation that needs to happen. Yes, I'm a fashion designer, but I'm also an artist. And I think it's an artist's responsibility to respond to social political issues or just general things that are happening around us, how it affects us as artists, and then how that translates into the outcome of our work. So yes, I think this provocation is a translation of my experiences.
Yeah, and you know, I think there's also something to be said about the kind of gentleness you bring to that provocation. I don't think, you know, while your designs feel very much like statement pieces, but what I'm hearing from you is the process is such a sensitively managed one, and very gently kind of held as well. If you could just share a little bit about how you see the role of sensuality, or the place of sensuality and sensuousness in thinking about costumes and garments.
Wow. How I think about sensuality is definitely different. Like what you mentioned, there's a certain sense of provocation in the way I approach things. And sensuality then to me is like how I believe in dressing the nuances. I don't believe in dressing the obvious. So I don't like obvious sensuality. The garment itself is or any garment, be it a costume or a piece of fashion garment, is something that is that's sticking to our skin. Yeah. It informs how we want to feel that day, and it leads and provides this guiding. I mean, when you wake up, you feel like, oh, I'm going to wear this today. I feel like dressing up. It's a conversation it's an image you want to portray, but using garments that itself, it's like having a conversation with a piece of fabric. That's very beautiful to think about. That's a beautiful idea to think about. And on certain days, no, I'm just going to wear a t-shirt and go out. That sets the tone for the day. And to have this unspoken relationship with our garments is something that is so neglected. And that's exactly what I want to do with Ang, actually. Because Ang is not just a fashion show. I think for Ang, it's really seeing garments as the performers. The performers are not the models, they are not the human bodies, but the performers are the clothes. And this, having this unspoken relationship with something that is clinging onto our skin, in itself, I think it's a very essential idea. Yeah.
Oh, I really love that. Yeah, I think there is such a deep, there is not enough attention being paid to materiality and the tactility, right, of these clothes and fabrics that we wear on us each day, and the choices that we make each day as to which fabrics or which garments we want to be in conversation with, right? And maybe as a way to close this conversation, I thought I would just reflect back to you, this incredible conversation that I see within your practice, that I see you as an artist constantly in conversation with the wider world around you, and also in conversation with the different creatives that you work with, and then finally that layer of conversations with the garments, with the fabric themselves, the way you play with drapery, the way you think about the wrapping or the cocooning. These are really intimate, and again, the word sensitive comes back to me. These sensitive conversations that you're having at every layer of your process is something that really strikes me from our conversation today, and I'm so excited to see your to see your actual costumes for the different productions. So, yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.